Training camp was supposed to be simple. Two quarterbacks show up, reps get split, coaches evaluate quietly, and the depth chart takes shape over time. That's how it usually goes. But this camp didn't follow the script at all, and everyone inside the building felt it almost immediately. Because the moment Shedeur Sanders stepped onto the field, things stopped feeling routine. This wasn't just another practice. The energy shifted fast. Throws that were supposed to blend into the background suddenly stood out. Conversations that were meant to stay quiet started leaking into public debate, and before anyone wanted to admit it, a quarterback competition had turned into a full-blown storyline. Coming into camp, many expected Dillon Gabriel to be the steady presence, the experienced option, the guy who keeps things calm while everyone settles in. On paper, that made sense, but football isn't played on paper, and perception can change faster than playbooks. Within a few sessions, people weren't whispering anymore. They were asking real questions. Why did one quarterback look so comfortable while the other looked like he was forcing everything? Why did every rep suddenly feel louder when Shedeur was under center? And why did the entire room feel like it was watching something unfold in real time? This stopped being just about arm strength or accuracy. It became about presence, poise, who looked like they belonged when the spotlight turned on, and once fans and media caught even a glimpse of that contrast, there was no slowing it down. Clips started circulating, opinions hardened, narratives flipped almost overnight. What should have been a controlled evaluation process turned into must-watch content, not because anyone planned it that way, but because momentum doesn't ask for permission. And here's the part that makes this uncomfortable for everyone involved. Nothing official had happened yet. No depth chart changes, no announcements, no decisions, but the conversation had already shifted, and once that happens, you don't get to rewind it. Because when a quarterback walks into camp and changes the temperature without saying a word, it tells you one thing loud and clear. This wasn't supposed to happen, but now that it has, everyone is watching what comes next. At first, it felt like any other camp day. Helmets on, routine drills, coaches calling out assignments. The kind of practice that blends together over a long summer. Nothing dramatic, nothing headline-worthy. But that calm didn't last long, because the moment Shedeur Sanders took control of the huddle, the entire atmosphere shifted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, it was subtle but unmistakable. The tempo changed. Receivers started finishing routes harder. Linemen stayed locked in a beat longer. Even the defense looked more alert, like they knew these reps suddenly mattered. You could feel it from the sideline. This wasn't just another quarterback taking snaps. This was someone commanding attention without asking for it. Coming into camp, expectations leaned a different way. Dillon Gabriel was widely viewed as the steady option, experienced, prepared, the guy who understood how camps work, and to be fair, he showed up focused. Clean mechanics, solid timing, no wasted movement, exactly what you'd expect. But football has a way of exposing contrast quickly. As reps stacked up, the difference became harder to ignore. One quarterback looked like he was executing the plan, the other looked like he was shaping the moment. Shedeur wasn't forcing throws, he wasn't overextending plays. He was calm in the pocket, decisive with reads, and comfortable pushing the ball when the window appeared. Nothing frantic, nothing rushed. That's when the room started paying closer attention. This wasn't about arm strength alone or completion percentage. It was presence. The way a quarterback carries himself between snaps. The way teammates respond without being told. When one guy steps in and everything feels sharper, people notice even if they don't say it out loud. By the end of that practice, the energy was different. Conversations lingered longer. Coaches watched more closely. Players glanced toward the same direction more often. What started as a routine evaluation quietly turned into comparison. And here's the key part: no one announced it. No coach declared a shift. No depth chart changed, but everyone felt it. That uncomfortable moment when a competition stops being theoretical and starts becoming real. From that point on, every throw was being measured against something bigger than the play itself. Every rep carried weight. Because once a quarterback walks into a room and changes the temperature like that, there's no going back to just another practice. The room had adjusted. And whether anyone wanted it to or not, the storyline had officially begun. This is the moment when things stopped being analytical and started feeling personal. Because once the first clips hit social media, the conversation was no longer about schemes, installs, or learning curves. It was about who looked like the guy. On paper, comparisons between Shedeur Sanders and Dillon Gabriel shouldn't have escalated this fast. Training camp is full of uneven reps. Some throws look great, others don't. Normally, those moments disappear into the routine, but this time they didn't. Because the contrast was visual. Fans didn't need stat sheets. They saw one quarterback driving the ball with ease, standing tall in the pocket, delivering throws that looked effortless. Then they saw another quarterback putting more strain into routine passes, resetting his feet more often and looking like he was pressing. Fair or not, perception formed quickly, and perception spreads faster than context. That's when arm strength debates turned heated, clips slowed down, side-by-side edits popped up, comment sections filled with arguments about velocity, poise, and NFL throws. What should have been film room discussion became emotional territory because once people pick a side, they defend it like identity. And that's what made it personal. It wasn't just about who completed more passes, it was about who looked comfortable being watched, who felt natural under pressure, who carried themselves like the moment wasn't too big. Those things are hard to measure, but everyone can feel them, especially fans. For Dillon, that created an uphill battle that had nothing to do with effort. Every rep suddenly carried extra weight. Every incomplete pass felt louder. Every routine throw was judged through the lens of comparison. That's not a fair environment, but it's a real one. Meanwhile, Shedeur benefited from momentum. When confidence and visibility align, small successes get magnified. A clean pocket throw becomes proof. A deep ball becomes validation. Even calm body language gets interpreted as leadership. None of that means the evaluation is over, but it explains why emotions escalated so fast. This is where quarterback competitions get uncomfortable, because once fans stop debating plays and start debating belief, logic takes a backseat. People weren't asking, who fits the system? They were asking, who do I trust? And trust is personal. That's why the comparisons cut deeper than usual. It wasn't just two quarterbacks sharing reps. It felt like one was taking space that the other expected to occupy, and once that feeling settles in, every practice stops being neutral. From that point forward, the competition wasn't just on the field. It was in every clip, every comment, and every conversation that followed. This is where everything sped up and control quietly slipped away. Because once the first practice clips escaped the facility, the evaluation process was no longer happening inside meeting rooms. It was happening online, and online doesn't wait for full context. Within hours, social media picked a direction. Short clips of Shedeur Sanders throwing in rhythm started circulating. Clean pockets, quick releases, deep balls that looked effortless on camera. It didn't matter that these were practice reps. The visuals told a story, and that story spread fast. Fans weren't asking who was learning the playbook quicker. They were asking who looked ready right now. And that's when momentum became a problem. Because on the other side, Dillon Gabriel was getting clipped too, but not in the same way. Missed throws looked bigger in slow motion. Slight hesitations became talking points. Even routine reps were dissected frame by frame. Fair or not, the internet doesn't grade on curves, it grades on reaction. Once that happens, objectivity disappears. Every post turned into a referendum. Comment sections stopped being discussions and turned into battlegrounds. One side argued mechanics and experience, the other side argued confidence and presence, and the louder one always wins online because volume creates the illusion of consensus. This is the part teams hate the most. Because public opinion doesn't just influence fans, it leaks back into the building. Players hear it, coaches hear it. Even if no one admits it, they know what's trending. They know which clips are getting replayed. And when one quarterback's name dominates timelines, it adds invisible pressure to every rep the other one takes. That's the trap. Dillon wasn't just competing against another quarterback anymore. He was competing against an algorithm that had already made up its mind. Every clean throw from Shedeur reinforced the narrative. Every imperfect rep from Dillon fed it. And once that loop starts, it's incredibly hard to break. What made this worse was how fast it happened. There was no long runway, no gradual shift. One moment it was open competition. The next moment it was how long until this is decided. Public opinion jumped straight to the end of the story before the middle had finished. And here's the uncomfortable truth: teams can say they don't care about outside noise, but they can't completely ignore it. When fan sentiment hardens, it changes the stakes. Decisions feel heavier, delays feel suspicious, silence gets interpreted as confirmation. That's why this section matters. Because once the internet crowns someone early, everything else becomes reactionary. Even patience starts to look like hesitation. And at that point, the competition isn't just about football anymore. It's about who can survive momentum long enough to change the narrative. And momentum, once it takes over, is ruthless. This is where the conversation shifted from highlights and hot takes into something more uncomfortable. Because as camp went on, fans and insiders started noticing a pattern, and whether intentional or not, it sparked a lot of quiet speculation. According to reports and observations floating around online, Shedeur Sanders and Dillon Gabriel weren't always being put in the same situations. Not in a dramatic, obvious way, but enough that people started asking questions. The word that kept coming up was development. It's been said that Shedeur was often placed in more controlled environments, clean looks, structured reps, situations designed to emphasize timing, rhythm, and decision-making. Nothing easy, but nothing chaotic either. The kind of setup that allows a quarterback to play fast and confident while the staff evaluates how he processes information. Meanwhile, reports claim Dillon was seeing a different side of camp. More pressure looks, tougher defensive packages, fewer clean pockets, the kind of reps that test resilience and adaptability but also come with more visible risk. Same goal, different routes. Now, to be clear, none of this has been officially confirmed. Teams do this all the time for legitimate reasons. Coaches often stress test one player while easing another in. It doesn't automatically mean favoritism, but perception matters, and perception is exactly what fueled the debate. Because from the outside, it looked like one quarterback was being nurtured while the other was being challenged publicly. And that's where things got sensitive. For Dillon, that meant every rep carried extra scrutiny. When you're thrown into tougher looks, mistakes are more likely, and mistakes are louder when the internet is watching. Even strong throws get overlooked when the drive stalls. Even good decisions get buried under outcomes. For Shedeur, the opposite effect took hold. Smooth execution reinforced confidence. Confidence reinforced the narrative, and the more comfortable he looked, the more people assumed the environment was built for him to succeed. That's how speculation grows. Fans started connecting dots. Commentators started choosing words carefully. Different paths, different timelines, different priorities. Nobody outright accused the team of anything, but the questions lingered. And that's the tricky part. Once people believe there's a split in how players are being handled, everything gets filtered through that lens. A rep isn't just a rep anymore, it's evidence. Silence isn't patience, it's strategy. And any delay in nomming a starter feels intentional. Whether these perceptions are fair or not almost becomes irrelevant once they take hold. Because quarterbacks don't just compete on the field, they compete inside narratives too. And by this point in camp, it was clear. This wasn't just a battle of skill sets anymore. It was a battle of pathways, and everyone was watching to see which one would reach the destination first. This is the moment when things stopped feeling like football and started feeling like management. Not because anything dramatic happened on the field, but because of what didn't happen out loud. When quarterback competitions stay clean, everything lives in film rooms and meeting notes. But once conversations start drifting into tone, fairness, and optics, you're no longer just evaluating throws. You're navigating people, expectations, and pressure from every direction at once. That's exactly where this camp landed. As the buzz around Shedeur Sanders kept growing, the building reportedly felt different. Not tense in a confrontational way, but cautious. Conversations were quieter. Answers got more careful. Coaches stuck to safe language. That's usually a sign that decisions are being weighed beyond just performance. Because once public opinion locks in, every move becomes political. For Dillon Gabriel, this created an impossible balance. If he played aggressively, mistakes got magnified. If he played conservatively, critics said he lacked confidence. Either way, the narrative was already leaning against him. That's when competition stops being fair, not because of bias, but because momentum doesn't reset. And here, where things got uncomfortable. Rumors started floating, nothing official, nothing documented, about conversations happening above the coaching level. Not lawsuits, not formal complaints, just the idea that things were being discussed differently than usual. That alone was enough to raise eyebrows, because quarterback battles rarely spill into that territory unless the stakes feel unusually high. It wasn't about reps anymore, it was about perception management. Every practice decision suddenly carried extra meaning. Who worked with which group, who stayed late, who spoke to the media. Even silence became a statement. Fans read into everything, and media speculation filled in the gaps with theories. That's how football decisions quietly turn into organizational stress tests. The irony is that none of this was driven by behavior issues or locker room conflict. By most accounts, Shedeur wasn't stirring anything up. He wasn't talking trash, he wasn't campaigning, he was just executing, calmly, confidently, letting his play do the talking. That's what made it harder. Because when someone forces the issue without saying a word, there's nothing to point at. No soundbite to correct. No headline to deny, just results, reactions, and rising pressure to handle the situation properly. This is the phase teams hate the most. When decisions start feeling urgent but making them too early looks reckless. When waiting looks like avoidance. And when every move risks upsetting one side of the fan base. That's when football stops being about playbooks and starts being about balance sheets, brand perception, and long-term fallout. And once a quarterback competition reaches that point, there's no going back to normal reps. Because now, every snap isn't just a football decision. It's a statement. What made this stretch of camp so unsettling wasn't trash talk, celebrations, or any kind of manufactured hype. It was how quiet the shift actually was. Because while everyone else was debating narratives, Shedeur Sanders just kept stacking clean reps. No speeches, no gestures, no reactions to the noise. He walked to the huddle the same way every time. Calm, direct, eyes up, the kind of presence that doesn't demand attention but somehow pulls it anyway. That's when teammates started responding differently, not because they were told to, but because trust was forming in real time. You could see it in the roots. Receivers came out sharper, breaks were crisper, and timing tightened up almost naturally. When the ball came out, it was early and where it was supposed to be. No hesitation, no extra movement, just decisions made on schedule. That kind of rhythm changes how an entire offense feels, even in practice. Meanwhile, Dillon Gabriel was still competing hard, but the contrast was growing. Not in effort, his effort was obvious, but in flow. Where Shedeur looked like he was operating within the system, Dillon often looked like he was fighting it. Resetting, rechecking, trying to force moments instead of letting them come. That's when the takeover became noticeable. It wasn't declared, no coach pointed it out, but players started gravitating. You'd see receivers linger near Shedeur between reps. You'd notice linemen talking things through with him after plays. Those little details don't show up on stat sheets, but they tell you everything about who the room is leaning toward. And here's the key part, Shedeur wasn't playing to win a competition. He was playing like someone who already understood the weight of the position. He didn't rush throws to impress. He didn't avoid tight windows out of fear. He trusted his reads and lived with the results. That confidence doesn't come from arrogance, it comes from preparation. As practices rolled on, the pattern held. One quarterback was consistently giving the offense answers. The other was searching for them. And once that dynamic sets in, it's incredibly hard to reverse. Because football players, especially at this level, gravitate towards certainty. By this point, the takeover wasn't loud. It was subtle, almost polite, but it was happening. The most telling part? Shedeur never looked like he was trying to take anything from anyone. He wasn't pressing for validation. He wasn't forcing a moment. He was just executing at a level that made everything else feel slower by comparison. That's what made it inevitable. Because when a quarterback takes over a room without saying a word, without celebrating, without campaigning, it sends a clear message to everyone watching. This wasn't about hype anymore. It was about control. This is the point where debate quietly turns into acceptance, not because anyone announced a decision, but because momentum stopped feeling abstract and started showing up everywhere at once. By now, Shedeur Sanders wasn't just winning reps, he was owning the narrative. Every clean throw reinforced what people already believed. Every calm series made the previous arguments feel outdated. momentum stopped being something people talked about and became something they expected. An expectation is powerful. Once fans expect a certain outcome, everything else gets filtered through that lens. A good rep becomes confirmation. A bad rep becomes an exception. That's exactly what happened here. When Shedeur delivered, it felt normal. When he didn't, it barely registered. The story had already moved on. On the other side, Gabriel was running out of space to change the conversation. Not because he wasn't capable, but because momentum had stacked the deck against him. Every throw he made had to fight uphill against an existing belief. Even solid plays landed quietly. Anything less than perfect landed loudly. That's how reality shifts without a formal announcement. You could see it in how people talked. The language changed. Instead of competition, it became timeline. Instead of who's better, it became when does it happen. Those small wording changes signal everything. They mean the crowd has already moved past the question and is waiting for confirmation. Even inside the building, momentum has gravity. Teammates feel it, coaches feel it. Nobody wants to disrupt flow once it forms, and when one quarterback is consistently giving the offense answers, rhythm starts to matter more than fairness. Football rewards what works now. That's why this phase is so hard to reverse. At this point, Dillon wasn't just competing against Shedeur anymore, he was competing against belief, against clips already burned into people's minds, against the feeling that the future had already introduced itself. That's not something you fix with one good practice. And that's the uncomfortable truth about quarterback battles in the modern era. They don't end with depth charts. They end when momentum makes alternatives feel unnecessary. Nothing dramatic had happened yet, no official word, no declaration, but the shift was obvious. Conversations were no longer split evenly. The fan base wasn't divided the same way. The tone had settled. Momentum had crossed the line from hype into reality. And once that happens, everything that follows starts feeling inevitable. By the end of it, the truth became impossible to ignore. This was never just about two quarterbacks competing for reps. It was about how quickly a room, a fan base, and an entire narrative can shift when one player changes the temperature without forcing the moment. From the outside, it might still look like a standard competition. Helmets on, playbooks open, coaches evaluating, but underneath that surface, something else was happening. The discussion moved past mechanics and arm talent and into belief. And belief is the hardest thing to win back once it's lost. For Shedeur Sanders, the story wasn't written with speeches or bold declarations. It was written rep by rep, calm decisions, clean execution. A presence that made the offense feel organized instead of rushed. He didn't chase attention. He didn't lean into the noise. The attention followed him anyway. That's what separated this from a normal camp storyline. On the other side, Gabriel found himself in a position every quarterback dreads. Not failing, but constantly having to answer momentum. Every throw had context attached to it. Every mistake felt heavier than it should. That's not a reflection of effort or character, it's what happens when perception runs ahead of process. And once that happens, fairness stops being the point. This situation revealed something bigger about modern football. Evaluations don't live in isolation anymore. They live online. They live in clips, reactions, and conversations that never turn off. A quarterback doesn't just compete on the field, he competes inside narratives that form faster than coaches can slow them down. That's why this felt different. No one officially ended the competition, no announcement closed the book, but momentum did what momentum always does. It narrowed the conversation, it simplified the outcome, it made alternatives feel like delays instead of options. And here's the part that lingers. Even if nothing had changed on paper yet, the environment already had. Teammates responded differently, fans talked differently, media framed questions differently. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens when one player quietly convinces everyone he belongs in the center of the story. That's why calling this a quarterback battle undersells it. This was about presence versus pressure, about who looked comfortable being watched, about who made practice feel like preparation instead of survival, and once that line was crossed, there was no real way back to neutral ground. So when people look back at this camp, they won't remember exact stat lines or rep counts. They'll remember the moment the conversation changed and how quickly it stayed changed. Because in the end, this wasn't about who won the job that day. It was about who took control of the moment. And once that happens, the rest usually follows.